Ever since the release of Pokemon in 1996, by far the Pokemon that people consider to be the most popular is Bidoof. No, I'm kidding, it's Charizard. Some people might consider Pikachu as well, but Pikachu is the mascot. Being the mascot of a franchise that's as big as Pokemon, of course Pikachu is going to get the most exposure out of any Pokemon. However, the Pokemon that is considered to be everyone's original favourite gets arguably the most exposure out of any Pokemon behind Pikachu, and is considered to be the most overrated Pokemon is, of course, Charizard. In fact, Charizard is apparently so popular, some people outright dislike Charizard for being as popular as it is. Charizard is the face of one of the most well-known Pokemon games, was still one of the faces of the remake, was the only Kanto starter to be playable in Smash 4, leaving Squirtle and Ivysaur behind in Brawl, was the star Pokemon of the Pokemon Origin Special, was even one of the star Pokemon of the Mega Evolution Specials, was one of Ash's star Pokemon in the anime, and was one of 2 Pokemon to receive more than 1 Mega Evolution. And even though Charizard did need a Mega Evolution since it kind of competitively sucked until Gen 6, it really didn't need 2 Megas, especially since both Megas are competitively amazing. There are Pokemon who are in desperate need of a Mega, and out of all the Pokemon, Game Freak decided to give not 1, but 2 to Charizard, because of how popular it is, I guess? Of course people are going to be annoyed that a Pokemon that they don't believe deserves as much love as it does is getting arguably the most love out of any Pokemon besides the mascots. Weirdly, I can't really think of any other Pokemon that people dislike just because of how popular it is. For example, Mewtwo is extremely popular and also received 2 Megas, and was the star Pokemon for multiple Pokemon movies, as well as appearing in 2 Smash Bros. Titles. But people don't tend to call Mewtwo overrated, so if people are getting sick of Charizard, why is it still considered the most popular Pokemon? Well, this brings up an interesting question. Is Blastoise more popular than Charizard? Now if you were to ask someone this question, their initial reaction would most likely be no. Of course Blastoise isn't as popular as Charizard. But when you really think about it, while Charizard may be considered the more popular Pokemon, and easily gets more exposure than Blastoise, when you ask someone who they prefer out of Charizard and Blastoise, the answer isn't really overwhelmingly in Charizard's favour. It actually almost seems like it's a 50-50. In fact, sometimes it might feel like more people would say they prefer Blastoise over Charizard. Now Charizard of course has appeared in other people's favourites lists, but I've never seen Charizard as the number 1 pick. In fact, I've seen Blastoise on just about as many favourites lists, maybe even more than Charizard, and unlike Charizard I've actually seen Blastoise being the number 1 pick. Just about every favourites list I've seen Charizard on, another starter is higher than Charizard, including quite a few times Blastoise. In fact, this brings up another question. Why Blastoise? Why not Venusaur? I mean, the very first Pokemon games were Pokemon Red and Green, and even the remakes Blastoise was the only starter that didn't get his face on the cover. Well, I can answer that with a few reasons. When it comes to who's Charizard's main rival, or who Charizard's opposite is, it's always Blastoise. It's never Venusaur or any other Pokemon. The first English Pokemon games were Pokemon Red and Blue, with Charizard and Blastoise as the mascot Pokemon, instead of Charizard and Venusaur. In the games, since Charmander is considered the most popular Kanto starter, that means most of the time the rival is going to pick Squirtle, which eventually becomes a Blastoise to rival your eventual Charizard. In the Origin Special, which is an adaptation of the games, Red, the main protagonist, not Blue or Green, picks Charmander, and his rival, who is our rival in the games, picks Squirtle. Even in the anime, Gary's first Pokemon is Squirtle, and the biggest Pokemon battle between Ash and Gary comes down to Charizard versus Blastoise. It's never Charizard versus Venusaur, it's always Charizard versus Blastoise. So with Charizard is still considered the more popular Pokemon, with Charizard being the star of almost every Pokemon battle between them. And even if Charizard doesn't win, there's still more of a focus on Charizard than Blastoise. Why is it Blastoise that seems to be the one that most people prefer nowadays? Charizard is considered to be the most popular Kanto starter, despite the fact that the game that has Charizard on it was outsold by the version that has Blastoise on it. There are people who definitely dislike Charizard, a lot of times for Charizard's popularity, but no one seems to dislike Blastoise. In fact, Blastoise to me feels like one of those Pokemon that everyone seems to like, whether it be because Blastoise is one of their favourites, or they just like Blastoise casually. So to see if Blastoise is as popular as I think, I went to Pokeamino and created a poll asking people which Pokemon they preferred, Charizard or Blastoise. And as I thought, the results of the poll were a lot closer than people think, with Blastoise actually being slightly more popular than Charizard. So, is Charizard still considered to be the most popular Pokemon, despite the fact that Blastoise is arguably as popular, if not maybe even more popular than Charizard? Well, I think I may have something that can hopefully make sense of why Blastoise is possibly the more popular Pokemon nowadays. To me, The popularity of Charizard and Blastoise is very similar to the popularity of Superman and Batman. Charizard is Superman, while Blastoise is Batman. When Superman and Batman were first released, for the first few decades, Superman was the much more popular DC hero, and probably the most popular superhero of all time. He got a lot more exposure than Batman, and if you were to ask someone who was the more popular superhero back then, the answer would easily have been Superman. However, around the 80s, 90s and onwards, Batman gained even more popularity, and out of Superman and Batman today, Batman is the more popular superhero. For years, Superman and Charizard were considered the most popular characters from their respective universes. Blastoise nowadays can be seen as more popular because compared to Charizard, it's considered the underdog. If someone were to say their favourite Pokemon is Charizard, that'd be considered a very boring choice, just like someone saying that their favourite superhero is Superman. However, someone saying that their favourite Pokemon is Blastoise is seen as a much more interesting and cool choice, like someone saying that their favourite superhero is Batman. Even today, with Batman probably being the most popular answer to the question, who is your favourite superhero, it's still not considered a boring choice compared to Superman. It's considered the cool choice, like someone saying that their favourite Pokemon is Blastoise. Nowadays, more people prefer Batman to Superman, similarly to how most people nowadays prefer Blastoise to Charizard. It would have been a different story for superheroes before the 80s, and for Pokemon during the 90s and the early 2000s. Now of course the popularity for Charizard and Blastoise isn't exactly the same as Superman and Batman, but there are definitely some similarities. Superman is also disliked by a lot of people because they consider him boring and even too popular, which really isn't the case now. Superman started out as the most popular superhero, but over time Batman became the more popular choice. It did take Batman a few decades to overshadow Superman, and it looks like Charizard and Blastoise are going down a similar direction. If Pokémon existed 10 years ago and I did the poll back then, there'd be a good chance that Charizard would have been more popular. But if I were to ask the same question 10 years from now, what's there to say that Blastoise would be the overwhelming favourite compared to Charizard? So, is Blastoise more popular than Charizard? The answer is, maybe. There are of course many Charizard fans still out there. However, there are probably just as many Blastoise fans, and who knows, maybe in 10 years time Charizard will still be considered the most popular Pokemon. Or maybe Blastoise will overshadow Charizard. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Charizard and Blastoise. If you also have your own thoughts on the topic, whether they be similar to mine or completely different, I'd love to know in the comments. As always, please like if you did enjoy the video, subscribe if you'd like to see more Pokemon videos in the future, as I try to upload at least one video every week. And until next time, thanks so much for watching.